Welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar, where we get to sit down and talk with interesting professional guitar players and related music industry experts. If you love playing guitar, stick around. You're in the right place. I'm Craig Garber, host of the Everyone Loves Guitar podcast. What you may not know about me is that I'm also the author of the book, How to Make Maximum Money with Minimum Customers. And since March of 2000, I've been running a busy marketing consulting firm. During this time, I've helped over 300 clients in 108 different industries all over the world sell everything from $20 books to $5,000 seminar seats and everything in between. Now, if you own or operate a business, ask yourself the following marketing-related questions and be brutally honest with your answers. Do you have an email list of prospects and customers, but you have no idea what to say to them, how often to say it, or how to make money with this list? Is your business website consistently generating new leads and making sales? Is it making you any money at all? If not, do you know why? Is your advertising effective? Is it consistently making you money? And do you know how to use social media effectively to market your business? If any one of these questions are puzzling you, then you need to book a one-on-one marketing strategy session with me if your business qualifies. After this strategy session, you'll know how to speak to and make money with your email list, how to use your website to attract customers and clients who are ready to buy from you now, and how to sell your goods and services for top dollar and at much higher profit margins than your competition. Listen, stop hoping things will get better on their own. Hope is not a very good business strategy. Instead, book a marketing strategy session with me by going to everyonelovesguitar.com/marketing and find out if your business meets the 5 criteria you need to qualify for this service. Again, that's everyonelovesguitar.com/marketing. Thank you for listening, and now let's get on with the show. Hey everybody, this is Craig Garber from Everyone Loves Guitar, and we're with a guitar player today who has truly been one of the most unique, inspirational, and innovative guitarists to come on the scene in the last 30 years. With the exception of maybe Eddie Van Halen, she's been more imitated than any other guitarist that I could think of, and especially with the commercial success she's had. We're here today with Jennifer Batten. Jennifer, as you all know, played with Michael Jackson, and she was selected from over 100 guitarists to get that gig, and she toured the world for 1.5 years, playing for over 4.5 million people. And in 2012, Sony released an exciting live Wembley Stadium show DVD as part of their Bad 25th anniversary package. After the Bad tour, Jennifer wasted no time diving into work on her debut album with renowned producer and ex-Stevie Wonder guitarist Michael Sembello. Upon Above, Below, and Beyond's release in the spring of '92, she was again asked to join Michael Jackson for his upcoming Dangerous tour, and in January 1993, she joined Jackson to participate in Super Bowl XXVII's halftime entertainment, which aired to 1.5 billion with a B people in 80 nations. It was actually the largest audience in television history at that time, and we'll talk about that today. Her follow-up CD was called Momentum, and that was heavily influenced by world music, and that got released just before she left for the Michael Jackson's final global tour in support of the History CD in 1997. In the spring of '98, none other than Jeff Beck asked Jennifer to join his band. They joined forces for 3 years on the CDs Who Else and You Had It Coming, which were both supported by world tours. Again, a DVD is available of this collaboration entitled Jeff Beck Live in Tokyo 1999. Jennifer's authored 2 music books and has released 3 solo CDs venturing from world beat and rock and roll to electronica. The last CD, Whatever, was released in September 2017, and it's also accompanied by a 90-minute DVD. The DVD includes some of the visuals from her one-woman multimedia show where she plays guitar in sync with her self-made projected films, as well as unreleased music videos and a guitar lesson. During 2011, she did a guitar residency for Cirque du Soleil show Zumanity in Las Vegas. And in the last few years, she joined forces with TrueFire.com to record instructional DVDs and downloads. She currently has a rock soloing course, a rhythm course, and the latest release is called Ultra Intervallic Licks. She continues to tour the globe in various formats, from bands to solo shows to clinics and master classes. And in January 2016, she received the She Rocks Icon Award and was also inducted into Guitar Player Magazine's Gallery of the Greats, and deservingly so. 2016 was jam-packed with recording and touring in various formats, starting a USA tour called The Ultimate Guitar Experience with the Scorpions' Uli Jon Roth and Andy Timmons. Jennifer, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thanks for thinking of me.
Oh, you're welcome. Your career is so robust, and you've done so many things, and you're so unique, and you've had such a big influence on so many other guitar players. It was really hard for me to figure out where to start with you. So let's just dig in a little bit and talk about your most recent recordings, and then we could work backwards. Sure. So you've got a new record out with Mark Shearer, who's the former vocalist of Lovecraft, and you're performing songs written by Jim, how do you pronounce it? Peterick? Jim Peterick, who is the songwriter and the founding member of Survivor. I listened to several tracks. It sounds really great. It sounds fantastic, and I wanted to ask you some questions. But before that, tell me how the record came about and what was your experience in making it?
Well, I have to say this is compared to my 3 solo CDs, this was by far the easiest CD I've ever done, because it was mostly done by the time they called me. I was just originally hired to do sessions, and so they flew me to Chicago. I live in Portland, and they wanted me to do, I guess, 3 songs. And from the past, I didn't think we'd get through them all. I was just going to be there for a day and a half or something, and it's the most productive session I've ever done. Not only did we get through everything, but the second morning before breakfast, we wrote Battlefield.
Wow.
Battle Zone, sorry. Yeah. Jim said, let's just have a play and see what comes out. And he goes, give me a riff. And so the main riff that ended up under the verse is how that started. And he was playing piano and just kind of humming a melody into a recorder. And it just grew from there. We ended up changing the key for Mark's vocal and obviously just layering, adding lyrics. And about a month or so ago, not that long after the Vegas shooting, because the lyrics have a lot to do with that sort of thing, they ended up putting out a lyric video, so that's on YouTube somewhere.
That's awesome. Why didn't you think you'd get through this 3 songs in a day and a half?
Well, being in the studio can be just kind of a time suck, depending who the producer is or if there's a producer. And I know when I do stuff myself, if I'm not feeling it, I'll take off and go to a movie and just take my time and perpetually be dissatisfied. But when you're on the clock, it's a whole different kind of vibe. And, there's a bunch of people there that are on the clock with you. So you got to get through it. And just past experience, I know sometimes it can go fast. Sometimes it can be like dragging a ball and chain. And this was just phenomenal. Jim was on the case. He was really inspired and coming up with ideas. Okay, put like the intro to Battle Zone where I'm playing alone is something that I'm not sure I even knew it was going to go to that song. He just said, play, just go. So, and then it got layered on top of the song. So it was really fun and inspiring, high energy. And the executive producer, Danette Paul, was like a great cheerleader. She's a huge rock and roll guitar fan. So, it really helps, the energy that's in the studio, because you can easily second guess yourself and say, oh, that's not good enough, let me redo it 100 times. But it was pretty much first takes off the cuff, really fun and energized.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned that you could second guess yourself. Do you feel less pressure when you're recording for someone else than when you're making a solo record, in that, sure, we are all our own worst critics, especially if you're a type A personality, which you obviously are because you're driven and successful.
Yeah. I mean, when you're doing a session, it's not your final say. I mean, sometimes they'll say, well, we're going to keep going until you're happy with it, which it's like, God damn it, now the pressure's on me. and I can easily always think I could top myself. Just give me another chance. And after a while, you just run out of gas. But when you got other people in charge saying, yeah, I like that, it's very helpful, as opposed to when I am doing my own records. I'll lay something down and maybe come back a couple days later and go, I could do better. So, especially with digital recording, it can be an endless rabbit hole where it's you think it's never done
because it's so easy to fix and change.
Sure. Yeah.
It's funny. Do you find, like, I know in business, it's taken me a really long time to have sort of a done is better than perfect mentality. Have you found that as you've gotten older, that's easier for you to accept?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there is so much to be said about, the first take, cause that's when you're really charged up, the emotion is there. And I remember, Jeff Beck's manager saying that so many times when he does sessions, they'll have him run it down and they're not even recording. And that is going to be the best you get out of Jeff is the first time around.
Oh, wow. So why aren't they recording?
Well, some people think you want to get a feel for it, just jam along with it.
But when you have someone like you or a Jeff Beck, it's not like you guys woke up and fogged a mirror and said, "Oh, let me try to play guitar." I mean, no, I mean seriously, when I went to Nashville a few weeks ago, and I've made some close friends from doing these interviews, and one of the guys up there, Rob McNally, he's a studio musician, and he invited me to a session, and so I've never been in a studio, and it was really great. But one thing that I couldn't believe is, so these guys are pacing back and forth, the writers, and they're talking in the studio, each other saying, "Oh, I wonder if we should do a different lick." And what I didn't understand, and maybe it's my naivete not knowing the process, if I had those guys there, I would ask them. I wouldn't. They're the expert. I wouldn't ask me.
Well, it really depends on the personalities. Some producers are real control freaks, and sometimes that's a good thing if they're really good and intuitive and really do have a good idea of what would be best. And then again, if you leave it to the player, it could. I'm sure they've all had experiences where the player just wants to do it 1,000 times because they think they can beat it each time and get it better. So somebody has to be in control. Right.
Yeah, it was really interesting, the whole process. Let's talk about a couple of cuts off the new record, the Shearer Batten record. First of all, the vocals and the production were great. I mean, it was super clean. The engineering was great mix, really state-of-the-art sound. First song I listened to was Battle Zone. It was very anthemic, great rock anthem. And I actually took out my metronome because I was like, holy shit, I got to clock this. So you're like blazing away like 16th notes at 132 beats a minute. So anybody who wants to hear classic, clean Jennifer Batten sound, there it goes in the first song, Battle Zone. And I was curious, like, what guitar you were playing on the song and either what pedals or effects you were using, if you even remember, to get like that slight overdriven or fuzz sound on the track.
I have a really simple setup. For probably 90% of the record, it was my signature model, a Washburn guitar called the JB100 that I've had for 20 years. It's been around the world. It's been broken. It's been stolen. And I got it back after it was stolen, and I finally retired it a year or so ago. So the other 10% is the new guitar I'm using, which is a Washburn Parallax. And it's the first guitar I've ever had that's 24 frets. And it's got a neck joint called the Stevens Cutaway, which is very unusual. And what it does is give you access to all 24 frets without having to stretch or strain. It's a pretty slick design. I love it. So that's I had a Duncan JB for the main guitar, my signature model that I used for the solos, and the newest one I have a Fluence. I just changed over to Fluence pickups, and I have what they call the Modern in the bridge. And then my amp I've been using ever since it was invented is by an amazing German guitar player named Thomas Blug, and I knew him as a player for many, many years and didn't realize that he was also an engineer for Hughes and Kettner, designing amps for the last 20 years. And he came up with this revolutionary design that it just blew their mind. And I think it was just too much for them because it's so small that people think it's a pedal, but it's a full-on head. It's essentially a 100-watt vintage Marshall with 4 channels and MIDI capable, and it's less than 3 pounds, and you could put it in your carry-on.
It's less than 3 pounds.
It's amazing, and it's tube driven with a nanotube. So once I saw that, I was at his house, and he had me plug into it, and I go, holy shit, when can I get one of these? And that was a prototype, and I had to wait way longer than I wanted to, but that's what I've been using ever since. So all of the amp sounds, the gain, I don't use any distortion pedals. It's all coming from the amp. And then I do what's called the 4-cable method that I run through a Digitech RP1000. That's a multi-effects unit that has an expression pedal on it. So like the beginning of Battlefield, there's a wah sound, so the expression pedal is programmed to be a wah. But usually for my solo sound, I have it set up to be a whammy pedal that I can bend down a whole step with my foot. And it gives you a real slide guitar kind of sound. So that's my setup. I toss in my luggage and have it everywhere in the world. And I've been doing that ever since that amp was invented, for sure.
And that's called, it's Thomas Bluke. Is it Bluke? Or Bluc? What is that?
Blug.
Blug. Okay, great.
Yeah, and his company's called Blue Guitar, Blug, and then the G starts guitar.
Very cool.
And that amp is called Amp 1. He only has one amp right now.
And you've been using it, how long have you had it now?
Oh, gosh, I think at least 2 years now.
Wow, that's pretty impressive, because I'm imagining that you have no shortage of access to gears and people saying, hey, Jennifer, check this out, check this out, check this out.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I was using my RP1000 and the amp models in it because I travel, and you really can't, even if you put on the rider, I want a Marshall such and such, you can't trust that it's going to be there when you arrive. They might say, well, we couldn't get it, so we got this instead, and the people getting the gear don't know the difference, and the tubes are not biased, and you get the rattiest crap ever. So I always want to be able to control.
Yeah, hell yeah.
And now that I can bring my own head, that's about as much control as you can get.
3 pounds, shit, you could put that in your purse.
Yeah, buddy.
That's amazing. So the second song I listened to is Tender Fire, more of a classic rock ballad. And I just had a question about like your soloing selection, because as a guitar player, it was really interesting. You played what to me sounded like a really soulful, bluesy pentatonic solo, but the song was not like a blues at all.
Yeah.
So I was curious, and I would imagine there's a lot of guitar players out there. What, and I don't even know if you can answer this because this is like breathing to you, but what prompted you to put a blues, and it was perfect. You know, what prompted you to put a blues solo or a blues-based solo in a non-blues song? I mean, it sounded just like amazing. I was like, holy shit.
Well, you know, I listened to it again this morning, and to my ear, except for the one riff I think you were talking about, it sounds more country to me. And I was, basically for solos, I just react to what I hear. And the chords change pretty quickly in this. And there's kind of a trick that you can use. Say if you have an E major kind of sound, I'll tell you, 12th position, right? You can kind of mess with an E minor. I mean, especially if it's dominant, you can go back and forth between an E minor blues scale and E mixolydian, which is major. You can kind of trick the ear by going back and forth. So that's what I did. I thought it would be more tension in the turnaround.
Yeah.
Through the song to go minor, and then when you come back to the second half of the solo, I changed to major.
Yeah, because it resolved right. That was awesome. But so, are you when you lay a track down like that, lay a solo down? How much of that is what you just said? I mean, are you not actually thinking, well, if I do this and I switch to E mixolydian, it's just more natural to you, right?
Yeah, it is.
So it's just it's reps, time behind on the neck.
Yeah, it's the 10,000.
Yeah, 10,000 hour thing. Yeah.
And then add a few decades after that, you just kind of hone. And I think a lot of it is subconscious, where when you really resonate with things that you've played, I think the subconscious kind of clocks that and goes, okay, we'll keep that, and stuff that's kind of secondary. Over the years, you get rid of it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I also listened to a track called In the Aftermath, which is from your last solo album called Whatever. And you opened that song up with a bunch of volume swells. And I was wondering if you were like rolling on and off the volume knob like a Roy Buchanan thing, or was that like a volume pedal you were using?
That's a whole other thing. It's an effect in the Digitech RP1000 called swell. And there's a Boss pedal called Slow Gear that's very similar, where what it does is when you attack a note, the volume swells in, so you don't get full volume at first attack. And the sound depends on how hard you attack. So if you attack really hard, then it's going to be a lower volume and then ramp up more. And I was just really inspired by that sound. And when I first started using it, I was going stereo, and I had a ping pong delay. So you hear the delay go back and forth between the speakers, and then you get this ethereal swelling thing. And it's just very inspiring. It's inspired a few songs.
Yeah, I really liked it. It sounded fantastic. And that song was a really pretty song. And it was kind of sad. I was curious, was that about anything in particular?
You know, I wrote that when I was with Jeff Beck. I was with him for 3 years, and like all the time that I had off, I would spend writing, because he's got a voracious appetite. He wants new songs, new licks, new ideas, and he always thinks that if we have one more killer song, then the tour will be a hit, kind of thing. And so I wrote a lot during that amount of time, and that song in particular was going to be on his record, You Had It Coming. And gosh, I flew home, and the next thing I knew, it wasn't. And it morphed into us. Oh God, I'll think of the title in a minute. It turned into a whole other song where it was the exact same groove, same vibe, but it ended up with a different melody from his improv. And the You Had It Coming record was done by Andy Wright, was the producer. And it was so fascinating to watch how they worked. There was a drum programmer in one room that would come up with the most killer grooves, and he would send it across the hallway to Andy and Jeff would just react to it. And that's how that record happened. And the producer had such a great and quick ear. He would hear exactly out of the improv what would make a great A melody and B melody, and it was just cut together like that. So at first I was super disappointed, because it's the first ballad I've ever written, and I was really proud of it. But ultimately, it's my song now.
Yeah. Well, you should be. It's a beautiful song. It's really pretty. I enjoyed it very much. So touche, 1 for 1. When is this? So it took you like what, 25 years? So the next one will be out in like 2053, 43.
I'll tell you about that last record. I mean, I wrote it years and years ago. Most of it was while I was with Jeff, and that's got 17 years ago now. But it got to the point where it was really done. And I would lose momentum by going on the road and coming back and trying to get my vibe back again. But at the end, it came time to mix, and I found that absolutely horrifying, because it was the first record I had done on a laptop, and I had made all these millions of micro moves to get it great to my ear, and certain pans for different things, and a lot of one-off sounds that would come through. So, because digital recording, you get unlimited tracks. So of course I put the kitchen sink in there. And when it came time to mixing, I just procrastinated like crazy. I mean, like 2 years of procrastination, because I didn't want to face the mix, because it's the most stressful part of a record. It can make or break all the work you put into it. And finally I came up with the idea of, I made notes of every single track and where it was volume-wise, like -2 dB or +2, and made notes of all the pans, and took that to the engineer that was going to mix it, because I don't have the skill to do a final mix. And so that saved a hell of a lot of time, because he used my notes, put it exactly where I wanted it, and then started from there mixing it. And still, to put the hours into getting the pans exactly right, it's not there. I think you did a pretty good job, but it's still horrifying.
Would you ever not think that, though. Would you ever listen to anything you did and go back and said, holy shit, this is freaking amazing?
As far as my mixing?
Anything that you're doing.
Well, there's a lot of stuff I'm satisfied with, but I just know my mixing is not professional.
Well, it sounds great for whatever that's worth. I thought it was amazing.
Well, thanks.
So January 93, Super Bowl 27, 500 million. That's not even something you could envision. 500 million people are watching you. And so I was curious, was anything going through your mind above and beyond the normal, pre-performance jitters?
You know what? I wasn't nervous. I was just excited.
Awesome.
But I will tell you, it's in 10 years, it's the only time I ever felt like Michael was nervous.
Interesting.
I mean, can you imagine the pressure?
No.
It's live. Anything could go wrong. And in fact, there was one moment that I'd still chuckle about, because there's one spot where he and I are right next to each other, and they have stage fog coming at us. And there's a couple seconds you can't see either of us.
That is. So what were you guys thinking at that time?
Oh, we're just in the moment. You just do what you do, and I doubt that either of us thought about it at that point. We're just inside of the tune, but there's no telling what the wind is going to do outdoors, and it goes by pretty quick. So I don't think anybody really noticed and said, "Oh, what a screw up."
Right. No, I think people are far less aware of like that stuff than we are up in our own heads of. The paranoia or the demanding, your bar is always high when you're kind of like, a type A and you're driven, and very few people are inside your head with you, on that journey. How'd you get the Jeff Beck gig, and can you share any interesting stories about your experience in working with Jeff?
Sure. That was like a fairy tale thing. It's like dreams like that don't happen. In fact, it wasn't even a dream I had, because he had always played with keyboard players. I was just a huge fan for decades. And at one point I learned every single solo on Blow by Blow and Wired and used to play along.
That's pretty impressive. Those are his two, that's defined him basically. Those are sick albums.
Well, I learned so much from that, and especially from the ballads, from Because We Ended as Lovers and Goodbye Pork Pie Hat. Because, I mean, that is rock school right there. How to squeeze the living shit out of a note. The bends are awesome. The wicked sounds, the emotion of them all. And that's, I think that's kind of what inspired In the Aftermath, was that kind of thinking in ballads. So I wasn't even pursuing getting in his band. I just wanted an autograph.
You were just a fan.
Yeah, big time. And, I knew, during the Bad tour, there was one of the keyboard players, Rory Kaplan, said that, I was talking about Jeff one time, and he said, "Oh yeah, I worked on his tour with Jan Hammer, and I can hook you guys up if you want." And I said, "Holy shit, yes." And prior to this, I had so many near misses. Like, I'd be at the NAMM show, and somebody would say, "Did you see Jeff? He was here just 10 minutes ago." No, you got to be kidding me. And then Rory never came through with the hookup, and so a couple of years later, I'm going on another Jackson tour, on the Dangerous tour, and I knew we were going to England at that time, and so that was my main focus of the whole tour, was how do I track him down and get an autograph and cross that off the bucket list. And so every show that we did in various countries, there would always be Sony reps, and Epic was part of Sony, and that was Jeff's label. And I would ask everybody, do you have connection with him? Is there any way I can meet him? And finally, the woman from UK said, "Yeah, sure, I'll call his management." And so it was all hooked up, where he had VIP parking, VIP tickets, and lo and behold, there was, I think, 2 opening acts that went on, and then Michael canceled the show.
Oh, my God.
All the days for that to happen, I was just destroyed. So I called him up the next day and said, I don't know when or if we're going to make up that show, but can I meet you anyway? And we had a day off, and I ended up going to the studio. He was recording his rockabilly record with the Newtown Playboys. And, man, I remember God, talk about Murphy's Law. I had one of those big honking video cameras back in, what would be 1992, and I hadn't charged the batteries.
Oh, my God.
And I asked him to play, during a break, I asked him to play the riff to Blue Wind, and he started playing it, and I got about 3 seconds before the battery died. But I got so schooled in that amount of time, because just seeing him play it as opposed to doing it by ear, I saw that he was bending things that I wasn't bending when I was trying to copy it. So anyway, my first record, Above, Below, and Beyond, had just come out, as well as a video for Flight of the Bumblebee that they were playing on UK MTV at the time. And so I gave him both of those, got my autograph, went on my way, and thought, well, that's it. I met him, probably never see him again. And he called me a couple months later and said, I finally had a chance to listen to your record properly, and let's do a record together.
Holy shit.
Well, that's what I did.
Oh, my God. Not the phone call you're expecting to get.
Yeah, so
wow.
I was flying high, and honestly, it was 5 years before it happened. And I thought, well, I know what it's like to be inspired in the moment, and you want to do this and that, and a year goes by, and then you're over it and on to other things. And I had seen him on a couple different tours in the meantime. He toured with Santana. I saw him in LA for a couple shows, and every time I'd see him, he'd say, we're going to do that thing. And I thought, well, yeah, it's just because I'm in your face that you're saying. Well, eventually he called me up and said, I got this tour of Italy. You want to do it? And I was just kind of floored. And at that point, I had another record out, Momentum. And even so, we had never played together. And I thought, that's a lot of faith you're having in me to book a tour without ever having played with me. So I had a session in Italy. And so I flew over there, and I arranged to go down to Jeff's house in UK. And I learned most of the guitar shop and just went there to play it in his presence to make sure. I mean, I was like forcing an audition on myself.
Sure. To
make sure he wasn't nuts. So that went well, and that evening ended with a whole lot of whiskey I didn't need.
Yeah, but that was probably, you walking out of there probably made you so much more comfortable and confident about what was about to happen than just like showing up and on stage. Hey, I would imagine that did a lot for you confidence wise. And
oh God, yeah. And I'll tell you, in those 5 years, I would have these recurring dreams that all of a sudden I was in the band and I felt so out of place. It'd be Tony Hymas and Terry Bozzio. I mean, these guys that I had on a pedestal about 9 miles high, and I'd be, little Jennifer back in the corner going, what the hell am I doing here? So it was super intimidating because I still have such high regard for him. He's my favorite guitar player ever. He just does otherworldly things, and I think most guitar players with any sense look up to him.
Oh.
And in fact, I had after I got in his band, I had one of the guys from Fender called me up and said, okay, I got the specs to his guitar. I built it. I got a Marshall. It doesn't sound like him. What am I missing?
Oh, man, that's funny. What are you missing?
I said, man, it's in his hands. It's 90% in your hands, and the timing and all kinds of things that you hone over the years. But I'll tell you, I've spent a lot of time. I would get in there very early before rehearsals would start, and I spent time with his Strat through his amp, and it sounds like me.
What is he like? If you had to come up with like 2 or 3 things, because I agree with what you said. When I listen to him, you can't even put it into words what he does.
Yeah,
it's really like outer worldly. You use that term, and I agree with you 100%. What is there like 2 or 3 things? I mean, and I know it's an infinite amount of things, but that he has a command of that nobody else really has. I mean, it's kind of like a Roy Buchanan mystique sort of thing,
Yeah. Well, I would go back to the hands. He's got pretty thick hands, and the DNA does make a difference on how it sounds against the strings. It's the way he attacks the strings. And during a show one time, it just hit me that there is an absolute marriage between him, his Strat, and his Marshall. There's like an understanding between the 3 of them that there's been so many hours spent that he's been able to craft every single nuance. And God, he'll just hit a wicked harmonic, and it's just so powerful. You could get 100 guys trying to do the same thing, and it wouldn't have the same impact. It would take a hell of a scientist. And I just got turned on to this thing called the Cracking the Code. It's a website, and there's a guy behind it that he had a Kickstarter, which unfortunately didn't get funded, but it was for a magnetics camera holder that allowed you to take film at any part of the neck, and you could actually slow down the film and see exactly what angle the string was being struck at. Or you could turn it around and see exactly how the left hand is doing it. And I think, the advancement of technology, the code is slowly being cracked, that you can take any guitar player and find out technically what they're doing. But still, there's a whole world beyond that that's it's in the ethos.
Yeah. Well, and then you think about that he's doing all this without a pick. It's just that's another freaking that takes the impossible and logarithmically multiplies it. It's not like 2 or 3 times harder. It's to the 10th power harder. I don't even understand what's going on.
He's got some very unusual techniques, and he takes a Fender bridge and has it at an angle. Most bridges are parallel with the body, and it just makes the guitar very awkward. The way he plays harmonics, the fake harmonics on the right hand is backwards from the way most people do it. He's got very strong hands, and he uses kind of heavier strings. I think probably the average rock player will use a set of Slinky 9s, and he might start out that way at the beginning of rehearsals, but I think he goes to 10s or 11s. So the thicker the gauge, the better the guitar is going to sound. But at a point, you're risking tendonitis.
Yeah, it's hard to play, especially the bends he's doing. He's not. Yeah, he's going nuts. He's not bending up a half step. He's crushing that thing.
And he's got such an incredible ear. I don't know if it's perfect pitch or relative pitch, but if his guitar is out of tune, he'll bend it in tune. And some of the stuff he's done, like the video or the harmonics that he does in a ballad, just a duet called "Where Were You," he does the entire melody with harmonics and the tremolo bar. And to be able to get accuracy that way, I challenge any guitar player to try that. It's really difficult. And then there's another one, when I was on stage, I'd be behind him, so I couldn't see his hands at work usually. And I didn't realize for a month into it, when we were playing a song called Angel's Footsteps, that for the second verse, he would take a slide, and he goes way beyond the neck to play those notes. And so there's little tiny millimeter micro movements between the notes when you get up that high on the neck above the pickups. And, you got to have an ear. If you don't have frets, you got to have an ear to get the melody right. And it's just when he turned around one time at rehearsal and was doing that, I go, holy shit, I didn't even realize you were doing that. And then, of course, I tried to do it, and I failed miserably.
That's amazing. So he's in the best sense possible a freak of nature when it comes to the guitar.
He is, and he's got the attention span of a gnat. And what that does is
wait a minute. How is that possible? How can you be? Wow. Okay, so explain that.
Well, I'll say that in that he never settles on anything. He's always looking for something new. If he's going to play a new tune, he's going to look at every possible way to play the melody, to do it differently than he's done before. He never wants to put out the same record twice. So, he'll go from the record, was that the Jeff record or Commotion in Motion, where he does a Pavarotti melody, and then the next one is a rock and roll record with these two girls. And
it's funny. I had Carmen Vandenberg, one of those girls, on the show last week.
Okay.
And she said, the one thing she said about Jeff was, she said he never you just said it, he's full on. He never stops practicing. He'll play. He 24/7. He's got a guitar in his hands.
Yeah. I've sat many hours with Jeff and his wife on a couch watching TV, and the stuff coming out of the guitar while he's watching is phenomenal. It's like his subconscious flowing out. It's just great.
Wow. So that was a really good experience for you in many levels.
Yeah, it was super inspiring. And when he's doing a concert with everybody, it's going to be different always than it is in rehearsal, especially when you have an improviser of that level. So there's an extra level of being relaxed when you're not on stage. So I heard stuff come out of him that nobody will ever hear. At one time we were going to do, I think, Goodbye Pork Pie Hat and do an acoustic thing. And it's like this whole other vocabulary came out of him that I had never heard before and will never hear again. It's almost like a jazz vocabulary. And where the hell did that come from? He's a monstrous country player, and you'll never hear that on stage.
Yeah.
So he was super inspiring, and he listens to everything. He'll listen to everything from Ornette Coleman to the Spice Girls.
Wow, that's the first time those two have probably even been said in a sentence.
Yeah, and he'll watch the X Factor or UK Idol or whatever, and usually be yelling at the TV the whole way through. But he's got such a sensitivity that if there's something worth picking out of all of that, he will.
So he's not like, he doesn't turn his nose up at anything. He's got his radar tuned to everything, basically.
Oh, he'll turn his nose up to plenty. But what he's doing is constantly sifting.
Right. Okay.
He'll find something. He'll find a color. We might be listening to some pop band, and the EQ of the snare will be what he walks away with.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he's just got his brain is thinking on different levels.
Yeah.
Than the average probably player who's focused on a guitar. He's focused on the whole world of colors and sounds and anything creative that he could assimilate into his guitar.
Yeah, and all the hours I spent with him in the studio, I'd be thinking, you really don't need me on a Jeff Beck record, although I did play. And sometimes I'd be thinking, we're hour 6 into this and week 2, and always, every single day, he would say something that I would go, that's why I was here. It was this little nugget of insight.
Like, can you give me an example?
Sure. The thing that sticks with me the most, and I was just at his house a couple of weeks ago, and he said it again. He said, basically, if the drums are right, if the drums are grooving, you don't need much else, which is a real Zen thing to say, because most guitar players will just throw the kitchen sink in there. So when it comes time for the second record, it's like there's more of that,
Sure.
In a different order maybe. But he's thinking on another level of how does it feel first. That's the most important thing.
Oh.
And that's why at the end of a Jeff record, you could always grab another record.
Oh yeah, there's none of them are the same. You said that before. Even Wired and Blow by Blow are totally different records. They're of the sort of the similar genre, but they're night and day records. Yeah.
I was working in a record shop when I knew Wired was coming, and every day is like, oh, is it in the mail? Did they ship it yet? Did they ship it? I was so excited because I was so all over the Blow by Blow record because it was on radio at that time, heavy, before radio turned to shit.
Right.
And I was really disappointed when I first heard Wired.
Really?
Because it was so different. Yeah, because I wanted another Blow by Blow.
Okay.
But as it grew on me, it's one of my 2 favorite records.
What's your other one?
Well, Blow by Blow and Wired.
Oh, okay. You mean his favorite of him, Jeff. Of Jeff? Yeah. I mean, just incredible. Yeah, and that I have gotten lost in Goodbye Pork Pie Hat literally hundreds of times over my lifetime. That just that's something that you could listen to, and it'll make you feel as deeply the 100th time you've heard it as the first time you heard it. It's just a powerful shit.
Yeah, and Charles Mingus, who wrote that, sent him a lovely note that was on manuscript paper, and Jeff cherished it. And he looked over one day, and Tony Hymas had a cup of coffee on top of it.
Oh my God!
And he just lost it. It was like, give me that.
Yeah, I could see that not going over well. Wow.
Yeah.
Uli Jon Roth, another like one of my early heroes. Any interesting stories about working or playing with him?
Yeah, he's a really fun guy, and again, super creative, wonderful player, but he is so goddamn loud, I don't even want to be in the same city. I mean, Andy and I both suffered. We both admire his playing, but God damn it, at the end of the shows, we all had our individual sets, but at the end of the shows, we came and played another 20 or 30 minutes with him, and we both had earplugs in. It's just devastating.
Can you not say to him, Uli, just turn the F down? I mean...
that's kind of like saying that to Jeff. And
yeah.
I actually did one time, and the only reason I did it was because he was so loud a couple nights that I know that he was losing the time. And the bass player was just about on the drum riser trying to hear the drums over the volume. But it's an old school mentality that you can't get your tone without being 1,000 decibels. And they're kind of married to that. And, the new amps, I don't think you have to do that. But I'll tell you, when I said that to Jeff, it did not go down well.
Yeah.
No, and he didn't. To this day, he didn't understand my intent, and I didn't explain to him what was going on because the vibe just shut me down right away. So There's that.
I hear you. It's like one of those things when you're a kid and your dad said, because that's why. And okay, that's it. And you ask them, why does this have to be? And their answer is because I want it that way. You just go away. What are you working on now that it's got you excited?
Oh, I've always got my hands in a million different things. I've got some sessions coming in this winter. I think I got a talk box in the mail coming today that from a session I did months ago. Now the guy wants me to do background vocals with talk box, which is it's a challenge because I'm a shit singer, but of course I can do it through talk box. But I jumped on that with excitement because I mostly do instrumental music, and anything to make a show more vocal from time to time, I'm all about it. So I'm excited about doing that. Let's see. I just finished my first video for the Cher Batten record because it's so expensive to tour a band. Not that we won't do a tour or at least some shows, but I think it's a lot more feasible to do what I do by myself, which is I do a lot of multimedia shows where I've cut film. I probably have over 3 hours of film, and I play in sync to the tracks that are embedded in the film. So I've been doing that for about 10 years, and I just finished a film that I uploaded last week for a song called Space and Time that was written by Jim Peterick and John Wetton. The late John Wetton. And I found these old films starting from 1915 of Alice in Wonderland. And it's a very, very trippy song, trippy lyrics. And I just love doing it. And in fact, I love making films more than I like playing guitar. So I really get lost in it. And my intent is to make a film for all of the songs on the record and be able to go out and perform with Mark and the film. So that's a lot to take on because honestly, my first film I ever made was about 50 hours of work, editing, downloading. This last one was less than 10.
For how much time, net time on film? People don't understand that. 50 hours of work for what?
4 minutes.
Yeah. People don't realize. And you know what? You said something too. If you could explain it, because I don't think the average listener may not be aware of it. You said it costs so much to tour.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that a little bit? Because I don't think the average person that's out there bitching about, man, this concert costs so much money. I don't think they fully realize what's involved. And
No.
I think they have the perception that all that money goes into the artists or the performers' pockets on top of that.
Oh, no. These days, I play a hell of a lot more outside of America than in. And for instance, if the Mark Scher band, we were to take the guys from Chicago, which would be second guitar, bass, drums, keyboards, and Mark and me, that's 6 people. That means a minimum of $6,000 in flights to get us anywhere to start with. You think how many tickets at $20 a head would it take to just pay for the flights? So the first few gigs are going to be at a loss. And then you got, Mark is not well known. He hasn't been out there pushing his career for the last 30 years like I have. And it's harder and harder to get people to venues now. There's so many clubs are shutting down because they just can't make it. There was some ridiculous amount, a shocking amount I heard several years ago, and a lot of this has really tanked since the 2008 crash, which is almost 10 years ago now, but people are still feeling the effects. There was something like 25 pubs a week were going under in the UK, and people were just drinking at home and just not going out to see music. And now you got endless streaming and live DVDs and Netflix, and so there's a lot of competition for people's attention. So to even take a band on the road is a risk. You never know. There's no guarantee that you'll make your money back. And you can lose money, a lot of money, in a hurry. And in fact, the very first tour I ever took to Europe was, what was my first record? 89, 92, something like that. I took a band to Europe, and we were out for 10 days, and I lost $5,000. And having said that, it was full houses every night. But you got to rent the gear, you got to pay roadies, the transportation, the van hire,
hotels, food.
Oh, hotels are ridiculous. And that was with guys sharing hotels that I still lost that amount of money.
Wow.
And it was not great hotels.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so it's pretty risky business until you're at a certain level. Somebody like a Brad Paisley that's at the A level. The tickets are that expensive because at that point they're going to have good hotels, and they should.
Right.
So you're paying $200 a night for the entire cast and crew. And with Michael, there was 100 people that traveled from place to place. And just the hotel alone, I remember talking to Michael's manager at that time, and that was 1987. And he said it took $500,000 a week in expenses just to keep us on the road.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, but I know that most people, aren't looking at the numbers and aren't aware of, the stage doesn't set up itself.
Oh yeah, it's like a construction crew, depending on what kind of show it is.
And that's why things like merchandise are so important for people, because that alone can make the difference between, do you make money on a tour or not?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing that, because I think people that are not involved in any industry, whatever it is, just see money and they don't understand, what it takes to put on the underlying thing that you're paying for. And it just seems like, smoke and mirrors, but there's a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah. And it really depends on the venue. I mean, there's clubs, there's better clubs, there's theaters, different size theaters. But once you get to a certain level, then you're going to have to pay rent to the theater, which can be thousands.
Yeah. So, well, I was going to ask you that. What percentage of every ticket sales ballpark? Let's say, okay, so I've seen several times, like I saw the Allman Brothers at the Beacon Theater. I've seen Government Mule at the Beacon Theater, up in New York. And it's a real nice theater. And that's a draw in and of itself. What percentage would you just had to throw a dart and guess of each ticket sale goes to the theater for rent, to rent the place out for the night?
I've never been on the accounting side of it. I couldn't begin to guess.
Interesting. But it's just a lot of money involved.
Yep.
Hey, where are you originally from? Where'd you grow up?
Upstate New York in the country.
Whereabouts?
really tiny town near Watkins Glen where they have NASCAR races.
Yeah, I know exactly where that is. I'm from New York
All
City.
right.
Yeah, I know exactly where. Isn't Watkins Glen? What else did they have there that was real popular? Was it just?
Well, they had God, I forget the name of it. It was kind of a Woodstock festival.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was your childhood like growing up there?
I was really blessed because it was a tiny, tiny town, and it was just like any kid growing up in the country. Always outdoors. In the winter, we'd be sledding down the sidewalk and just playing off into the woods, and it was a wonderful way to grow up. And when I was 9, we moved to San Diego, and that was a real shock to go from that to a city. And San Diego's just grown by leaps and bounds since then. That was before there was any traffic jams when we moved, I think in 69, something like that. Yeah. So it did. I think my childhood was really great. When I moved, started guitar lessons right away and did the whole teenage growing up in San Diego. I'm not coming up with any good stories at the moment, but I have good memories.
No, that's great. How did you get into, like you said, you took lessons in San Diego. When did you first pick up a guitar? Was it upstate or was it out west?
Yeah, it was upstate. I was 8 years old and started taking lessons right away, learning how to read out of the little Mel Bay books at the local music shop kind of thing. And the family moved several times, so I ended up with, once I got to San Diego, I ended up with several different teachers, which was great. So the first one was in a folk group called Up With People. So that's where I learned right-hand technique and finger-picking style and some folk songs. And then my next guy was into the blues, next guy was into rock. So it was kind of cool to have a variety of types of music. And my dad was seriously into jazz, so I would have that. That was the musical backdrop in my home every day.
Great. So you had a pretty high awareness of much more complex stuff going on in a musical piece than the average kid listening to, rock and roll only.
Well, at least in my subconscious,
which does everything for you, as you know.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. There were no women, I'm sure, doing what you were doing, playing guitar then. And yet, I guess my question is this. There had to be something going on in your head that allowed you to become so successful as a player and so determined to not just be a good player, but to kind of like, create something that really, and explore something that really hadn't been done. And I'm wondering if what was that inside of you, or how did it get there?
Well, I think it was a combination of things. One is how music affected me when I listened to it. Back when I was in New York, I was part of the Beatlemania. My whole town was into it, and we traded Beatle playing cards that came with a stick of gum, and everybody wanted Beatle boots and Beatle haircut, and I was there watching them on Ed Sullivan. And there was such an excitement about it, and every new record that came out, you just memorized it and listened to it until there was no tracks left on the vinyl. We knew every inch of every album cover, front and back, knew the lyrics, and it was just something that lifted your spirit, bonded the community. I remember being at parties a couple times where there was somebody that could play guitar, and I thought that was just the coolest thing in the world. Combined with my dad, my parents were both into music. My dad played guitar, although not professionally. My mother played piano, but not professionally. So that the environment was rich in frequency, shall we say. And my dad had a really high regard for musicians. Some households, parents think that musicians are scum, drug addicts, and they'll never earn a living kind of thing. So it was a really healthy environment to grow up in, having my desire to play nurtured, and having a guy that would pay for lessons week after week. And I just liked it.
What kind of work did your dad do?
He was a doctor. He was the country doctor in New York, and I think he said his midlife crisis was moving to California. So, I think he got really burnt out in the winter times. People would have a sniffle at 3 a.m. and he'd have to make a house call through the snow. And that, it's one thing when you're 20 and it's a whole other thing when you're 35 or 40. So we moved west and got rid of the snow.
Yeah. I tell you what, I love upstate New York, and if it wasn't for that cold, I would live there. I mean, it's just a beautiful place. The people are wonderful. It's safe. It's really just a nice, relaxed place. It's gorgeous. It's just that weather. That's not for me.
Yeah.
Everybody pays tuition in their career, whatever they're doing, and I was wondering if you'd be kind enough to maybe share one or two mistakes that you might have made along the way, along your journey, and what were the lessons that you might have learned.
There's a whole lot of mistakes. I could write a book on mistakes. The first things that came to mind were, at one point, I wrote my first book, which honestly, I did it so I would have something to show for all the hours I was putting into music. Because when you're practicing 8 or 10 hours a day, you don't really realize the advancement, because it's minuscule advancements week to week. And unless you could jump 10 years in the future and have a look back and go, wow, I've really improved, it can be frustrating. And so I wanted to write a book and have something to show for my time in music. And I wrote transcriptions of my teacher at one time, whose name is Peter Sprague. He's a monstrous jazz player that got me prepped to go to GIT. And I felt safe. I after GIT, I had the skills to be able to transcribe and get the rhythms right and notes and everything. And I was a little leery about the chords, and I had him there to help me. So I kind of had a safety net. So I'm thinking, oh, it's my first book. And I went out and had 1,000 copies printed, not realizing that, number one, nobody outside of San Diego knew who he was. Number two, although he had a ton of fans that would come to see him, there was a smaller percentage that were guitar players and a smaller percentage still that wanted to actually learn what he did. So I think at one point I ended up putting 800 books in the trash.
That's so normal, though, for somebody that writes a book. It's pretty normal thing to do, because you're so proud of it, and you're like, oh shit, now I got to sell this thing. My interests were such a bubble. Of course everybody's into guitar, and of course everybody wants to learn this, and then it went on again. Although I won't say this part was my fault. I put my first book that did come out was on two-hand tapping with the REH company, which was affiliated with the GIT school, and so at one time I had a conversation with the publisher and said, Van Halen has a new record coming out, which was 1984. And I said, how about if I transcribe his solos? And the guy goes, sure, do it. And so as soon as the record came out, I did. I spent, 1,000 hours trying to. It was so much harder than the bebop record book that I did, because Van Halen tends to do things in clusters. So instead of straight 16th notes or triplets, he'll do like a group of 9 and then a group of 13. He just does this. Holy crap.
His playing is so much more wild. And then on the next bar, he'll land on his feet. So it's not just random stuff. He does have a sense of time. But to be able to write out those rhythms was a real challenge. And it just looks like fly shit on paper sometimes. And so I finished it. And then I called up the publisher and said, okay, it's done. And he goes, oh, okay, so do you know anybody in Van Halen's camp? Like he didn't know how to get permission for it.
Oh my God, that's something that maybe you should have asked you before.
You think?
Holy crap.
So I did the whole thing, and it was scrapped. And I did a couple more books on two-hand tapping that were scrapped. I'd get so far. Well, I did this whole system about doing diatonic scales and harmonic minor and arpeggios with two hands. And after I wrote everything, I realized this is really difficult to do. So I ended up scrapping that. I'll tell you something that I do feel guilty about. Let's see. There's a couple things. I mean, anytime I don't follow my intuition, that tends to be a problem. There was one request from John Jorgensen, who I think is one of the greatest guitar players out there. I mean, I see him every time he comes out here, and he just floors me. And he's so versatile and so badass. It's just sends shivers down my spine. And you know, I had seen him play a few times, and in the middle of a show, he was doing one of his Django shows. He pulls out clarinet. And I thought that was the highlight of the show. He just took it to another level, and it's just such a musical genius. I don't think he personally called me up, but he had somebody call me up and say that he was doing a project where he was going to jam with a lot of different players, and he wanted to jam with me, and it could be any song I choose. And at first I go, yeah, let me do that. And as soon as I hung up, I just shit myself. I thought, oh my God, you know, I am not on that level. And even if I can control it by choosing my own song, I just don't want to do it. And that's one of those things. I was so intimidated, I just didn't communicate with anybody. I just pretended it wasn't there, and it went away.
Really?
You know, and I've experienced that. People have done that to me, and it just pisses me off. It's like, at least let me know you moved on and you're not interested anymore, but people will just disappear instead.
Wow. Yeah, you must have. How old were you at that time?
Oh, old enough to know better.
Wow. I mean, I don't know you well at all, obviously, but I mean, you don't seem like that. You seem pretty direct. So you must have been really like either overwhelmed or intimidated or just like
both.
Yeah, I understand that. And it's yeah. Wow, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't care who you are. In certain situations, you're going to be insecure.
Of course, yeah. You know, it's funny. I interviewed a guitar player a while ago, and I don't remember the full story, but he said, like, you know, the little secret is the top 10 guitar players in the world are in the room, and all they're worried about is the other 9 guitar players.
Yeah.
You know, and every single person I speak with, no matter what level they're on, and especially, you know, someone like yourself who's, you know, clearly sown your oats, and nobody needs to, you know, you certainly don't need to make any introductions, or, you know, everybody knows your competency. Everybody feels the same way in that level too. It's always, you know, you're always thinking, there's always a lot of humility involved. There's never, I have not seen any like, well, yeah, I can kick their asses kind of thing. Which I guess is a good thing, you know. It's a much nicer to be around someone like that, you know.
Well, you know, if you stay humble, and you got to know, no matter who you are, there are 100 players that could kick your ass, and are better in different ways. They might be more expressive in this way, or have an individual voice that they came up with that you never saw coming. When you stay humble like that, then you keep growing and keep searching, and also keep being inspired about new players.
Sure. And
I was just gonna say, there's a player that I discovered in the last year that's got a ton of YouTubes up, named Matthias Asato, and you know, I kind of got burnt out on guitar because it's just like, I don't know. There was one time I was so into it that I would make back-to-back solos tapes, like Van Halen. I took all of his solos, put them back to back, so there's no lyrics, no verse, no chorus. It's just solos, and it's after a while, it's like eating fudge for dinner. You know, it's like you got to have more to it than that. And I just got burnt out on guitar. Maybe in the '90s, I started listening to a lot of ethnic music, maybe African thumb piano and electronica, just to get out of that whole zone that I had been in so much. So I think that's one of the things I learned from hanging out with Jeff so much, is that he'll listen to anything as long as it's fresh and inspiring and something new. So anyway, this guy comes along, and, you know, I'll click on links from time to time, and I usually last 4 bars unless I'm hearing something that really knocks me out. And this guy does. He's got a very unique feel that is superior to 90% of the stuff I hear out there. So I've been re-inspired.
And what's his name? Matthias?
Yeah, Asato, Asato.
Cool.
I think he's Brazilian.
I have to check him out. I think that's common no matter what you're doing. If you do something, pretty much 24/7, at a certain point in time, you got to just throw your hands up and just somehow chill. It's hard, but it takes its toll. Anything, even a good thing like guitar or anything.
And I'll tell you, traveling like I do, people give me CDs endlessly, and
oh yeah, I would imagine.
A lot of times I don't even. Well, now I don't even have a laptop with a CD reader, so I don't even listen to them. But in the beginning, I would pop them in for at least a couple songs, and there's so many guys that sounded like Steve Vai that it's just like there's already a Steve Vai, and he sounds better than your version of him. so just stop it.
I like that. He sounds better than your version of him.
And I'll tell you too, I've been in Jeff Beck's studio in his house where people send him stuff, and 16 bars at the most. He'll hear stuff, and if he's heard so much already, and he pretty much invented rock guitar. So when he hears the same old shit, it's just going to go straight in the trash.
Yeah. And he's played in every genre. He's played blues. Yeah. I mean, he's played everything, So he's got to be tough to impress.
Oh, yeah.
Let's talk gear for a few minutes. You said you have your go-to guitar is, I guess you said the two Washburns?
Yeah. Now it's they have a series called the Parallax that's been out for a couple of years, and I'm using the PXM10, and I actually have 3 different ones that are the same body, but I'm experimenting with them all. And one of them, I have the Line 6 Variax guts in it, so it's got models of Strats and Tellys and different things. And there's some problems with the electronics. I want to get it happening, so I want that to be my workhorse guitar, because in the gigs I've done in the last 15 years, I take one guitar. That's it. I jump on a plane and that's it. So I can kick into acoustic models and instant detuning to any tuning. There's a lot of gigs I do that they're either tuned, the rest of the band is tuned down to E flat, or, it's just a pain in the ass. So if I don't have with a Floyd Rose, you can't detune instantly. It takes all day to settle into another tuning. So with the Variax, you can just pop a button and go, boom, E for the rest of you.
That's phenomenal. So, yeah, I can see why you want to get that worked out.
Yeah.
Is there any cool or interesting stories behind how you got any of your guitars?
Well, the only one I would say is when my father passed away, I got 3 of his guitars, and he, like I said, he wasn't a professional, but he enjoyed playing jazz in that style. And he had a L4 and L5 Gibson, and he also had a Parker Fly acoustic. And I brought him home with a lot of other memorabilia and CDs of his, and just kind of put him in the corner for several years. And so one day I picked up the Parker Fly acoustic, and holy shit, just an amazing guitar. It weighs nothing, and it sounds so good. I just fell in love with it. I didn't realize what I had, and they don't make them anymore. If you find them, they're at least $3,000.
Wow.
If somebody can rid them, but very difficult to find. So there's that.
So now you got this great guitar with a ton of nostalgia and good feelings attached to it, which is really kind of hard to beat.
Yeah, indeed.
That's great. Who are your biggest influences guitar-wise? Or maybe a better question is, who are your influences that people would be surprised to hear were your influences?
Maybe Joe DiOrio. He was one of the 3 teachers that was at GIT when I went through. And because he's hardcore bebop jazz, a lot, especially the younger generation, would have no idea who he is. And unfortunately, he had a stroke years ago, so he hasn't been out playing. Well, God, I think he's 85 at least, maybe 89 now. But he was, God, my biggest inspiration for many years when I went through the school and after. I went to every gig he played for several years, and memorized his books. And in fact, the course that I have at True Fire called Intervallic, what the hell did I call it? Intervallic Licks or something?
Yeah, I got it. It's called Intervallic, Ultra Intervallic Licks.
Yeah.
It's not just Intervallic Licks, Jennifer. It's Ultra Intervallic.
I will say it was the marketing people at True Fire that helped me with that title. But I was so inspired by Joe's Intervallic playing, and the source of that is Nicholas Slonimsky, who wrote a book called The Thesaurus of Scales and Melodic Patterns. And he was one of those really avant-garde classical guys. He lived to, I think, 102 years old. Russian musicologist, knew 5 languages, wrote several books. And one I recommend to everybody called The Lexicon of Musical Invective. And what that is all negative reviews of what turned out to be really famous, iconic classical composers.
Wow, that's funny as hell. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's, Paganini is this bombastic bastard, and why is he even on stage? And, years later, it's like the best of the best. So
the Lexicon of Musical Invective. That's great.
Anytime you get a bad review and you start to take it personally, just start reading that stuff, and it kind of flattens things out.
That's great.
So anyway, his book, The Thesaurus of Scales and Melodic Patterns, just kind of flopped at first. And then guys like John Coltrane, Eddie Harris got a hold of it, and Joe DiOrio played with Eddie Harris, and so really started exploring playing music with wider intervallic jumps than typical thirds or second scalar kind of movements. And it sounded so fresh to my ears. I really, really got into it and memorized his book on it, and then just kind of did my own thing with it over the years, and finally turned it into a course that's more rock. It's taking that concept and adding bends in it, pretty much.
Are you outgoing or shy by nature?
I would say I'm pretty outgoing due to the nature of my business. I found over the years that I've gotten fairly aggressive for my personality, and definitely aggressive for my family's personality, just because I've had to make sure things aren't a disaster. I kind of jump on it and see things in advance that might be screwed up, and try to be aggressive about it. And between that and meeting a lot of people and having years of teaching years ago, where I've been forced to express myself. I think teaching is one of the greatest things in the world, although I don't do one-on-one anymore, because if you're trying to explain something to somebody and they don't get it, you have to find another way to make it work, to explain that to them so that they get it. So that was a real good communication growth period after GIT when I got into teaching. But other than that, I do enjoy people. Not all the time, I often say when I'm home, I am happy to be alone 23 hours a day.
Yeah.
Yeah. I need a little stimulation from time to time, and that could be a phone call, and then I'm good. But when I'm on the road, it's stimulation every single day, jump in the van, talk to people, get to the show, talk to people after the show. And, so I think that's kind of shaped a more outgoing personality. But
so as a break from that, you enjoy your quiet time when you're not in that zone.
Yeah, I think I can only take so much stimulation, and I need the quiet. I need to reflect, go walk the dogs, and that time is input time. Listening and recharging the batteries. Because if you're always outputting, you're going to run out of gas after a while.
Yeah, you're not going to learn much either.
Yeah.
You're not really going to, I don't know, you have to listen to grow, you can't.
Yeah.
We only know the answers in our head already. So, you can't learn anything more if you're not taking that stuff in. I find anyway.
And having said that, you know, in social situations, there can be energy exchange that really fuels me. Just one seed planted, and I'm on my way to a whole different thought. And actually, that happened this weekend. I had a bunch of people fly in for a big party for the whole weekend, and just from conversations, there was things planted that I will pursue from there.
Awesome. Tell me something about yourself people would either be surprised to hear or would find a little odd. Well, for one thing, I like making videos more than music. I find that if there's anything that's going to make me lose time and not want to get off the couch and even pee because I'm so into it, it's that. And also in the last 15 years since I moved to Portland from LA, I've gotten into several different art forms. And one is I took almost a year off when I moved up here and took stained glass classes. And then I got into fused glass, and it was a serious everyday 3-year obsession. I made a ton of things, and then I started getting really busy with music again and dropped glass entirely. And then I got into making steampunk metal fantasy airships with vacuum tubes and copper tubes. It's pretty whacked. My biggest project is almost 8 feet tall. Wow, that is massive.
Yeah, it's started out as a small thing, and that particular piece is something that grew over 5 years, and there's little fantasy worlds within it with little miniature people and pilots and wings and just whack-ass stuff. That's a really fun place to put my mind, to go to visual arts. And I find that it enhances music when I get back to music.
So as you've gotten older, you've gone from, let's say, an exclusive auditory to a little bit more of a visual, creatively wise.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it all comes from the same place, which is creativity.
Sure.
And you just stretch that creative muscle in any way you can. There's an infinite amount of art forms, and in some way it makes its way back to music.
What made you move to Portland?
I just got so sick of LA. I was there for 20 years, and it finally got to the point where at least 95% of my work, I jumped on a plane and went to other countries. And at one point I go, I don't even need to be here, so why am I? Because at that point, I'm sure they've passed 20 million people by now, but the freeways are so nasty that even going to shows, it was just negative. Just a hassle, a pain in the ass, trying to find parking. And it got to the point where I would rarely see any of my friends because we're all going through the same thing. And when we don't have to be out and don't have to be in traffic, we don't even want to see anybody.
Sure. Yeah, I could totally relate to that. Who wants stress is the bottom line.
Yeah. And it ultimately, you get that cortisol flowing on a regular basis, and it affects your creativity.
Totally.
And I would get home and I'd fly over all this nasty cement, and it's just not enough nature. And since I grew up in the country, I think it's a common thing that people end up on the second half or the end of their lives going back to a similar kind of thing, being able to experience seasons again. As I find that really invigorating, and I look back at LA as Groundhog Day. In fact, I think the most embarrassing gig you can have in LA is being a weatherman, because it's the same thing every day.
That's funny. Yeah, I think a lot. It's funny because I grew up in New York City and I live in Tampa, and I don't think I'd want to live in New York again because it's just there's not enough space. But I do miss the energy a little bit. And I don't know where I could find a happy medium. And then we got 3 kids and a grandchild now, so my wife's not going anywhere. But, and I'm like, well, that's a reason to leave. But no. So I know what you're saying, though. You want to kind of go back to something that's familiar to you in a nostalgic way. It's a comfort level.
Well, also, I would say nature.
Right.
I find there's such calming, healing properties to being out and smelling evergreen trees, where LA, that just doesn't happen. I mean, you can spend your whole life walking on cement and never touch grass.
Sure.
And I just think emotionally and psychically, it's not healthy.
No, it's not, for sure. It's definitely great being out in the fresh air, and yeah, for sure. What would you say your non-musical superpower would be? And maybe you'd mention it in your creativity.
Yeah, I looked at that question this morning, and the first thing that came to mind is travel survival.
That's a very
because it is difficult, and I get beat up, and I have people, when I tell stories to my friends that don't travel, they go, I don't know how you do that. How could you possibly do that? This last trip, I was out in Europe and UK almost 2 months. I took, at least a dozen flights, and 3 or 4 times I arrived with no luggage. One night I had to borrow a guitar, and another night I had this really important show in Cannes, France, that we flew in for. And a TV network was putting it on. And it was real VIP exclusive. And I didn't get my guitar till an hour before the show.
Wow.
And that kind of stress, I just want to stab somebody,
No, I can totally get it. Yeah. Because it's not one stress. It's traveling. It's being out of your neighborhood. It's a million things. And on top of it, you're there to perform, and you can't even, your tools are gone.
Yeah. And that particular night, we did a show in England and drove overnight to Scotland and went right on the plane, so nobody got any sleep. And then to arrive without your luggage, that's too much. It's just too much. And that's just the nature of travel. It just is what it is, and you got to deal with it. And sometimes you don't get enough sleep, and of course that makes you really bitchy and pissy. And I remember Adrian Belew one time, we were having a conversation, and he goes, man, if it wasn't the joy of being on stage, which you don't get every night. I mean, sometimes you're on stage and it doesn't go well, or the sound isn't great, we would never do what we do. We would never travel like we did.
Which is a big sacrifice for an hour to 2.
Yeah.
At a pop, it really is.
Well, depending on what kind of gig it is and what kind of connection you have with the audience, it can be worthwhile, where that 1 hour changes your brain chemistry and charges your batteries.
Yeah. 2 more questions. Who's had the biggest influence on you, on your life in general?
Oh, God. Well, it would have to be my parents. That early brain programming, really, in the environment, making friends at that age and running around the woods, and having the support and guidance. Not everybody has that. There's a whole lot of people that have really shitty parents and a shitty upbringing, whether they're alcoholics or beat their kids. I feel really blessed that mine was really peaceful and supportive.
That's great. And last question, what's something that you've learned about you through this entire journey you've been on? Or a couple of things about yourself.
Gosh, well, there's a lot of things I've learned, and one of the things I am, you mentioned that I was a type A personality, and I suppose I am in some regards, but I do not consider myself alpha, in that I don't want to be a band leader. I don't want to have to look after everybody, and I've been through that, where I have to call up and schedule people, and then people cancel, they show up and don't know the tunes and all that crap. That's the reason I came up with a solo show. And granted, I do a lot of different things. I do different workshops, different clinics, different playing with different bands, freelancer here and there. But ultimately, I did the solo show because I don't want to be alpha. I don't want to have to look after anybody else. And I want to always be in a position where I can fire somebody. Either leave or fire somebody, because especially when you're on stage, it can be a super intense experience. And if you have any one person in the band that's got toxic energy, that's going to go downhill really fast. So that's another reason I did it, to have control.
Which is alpha, you know that, right?
Taking control? Well,
yeah. I'm not saying it's a bad. I'm an alpha. I mean, and not in a bad way, but it's just, you want to run your shit.
Yeah.
I think it's a good. It's an admirable trait. I think so anyway.
But okay, I'll take it.
Yeah. Listen, I cannot thank you enough for your time. You've been like a real pleasure, and you've been so open. I really appreciate it. How can people, talk about what you're doing now, and where people could find you, and where can we get people to enjoy what you're doing and send you some money and all that kind of good stuff? I know you got a bunch of things you're working on.
Yeah. Well, I'll say the newest first, because I'm kind of excited about it. I joined a company called neckillusions.com. And when I first saw their stuff, I had absolutely no interest. And now that I'm with the company, I go, this is really fun. And what it is guitar neck stickers. So it's a way to decorate your guitar. You could turn a maple neck into an ebony neck with something that looks like a vine inlay that would cost you $2,000, but it's $22.95. And you can change them out as often as you want. It doesn't leave any residue on the neck, and you can place them and replace them however you want. So I've got 6 designs that are mostly steampunk based, because that's what I'm into. Steve Vai has designs that he drew up himself, and it's just a really kind of fun thing. Good Christmas thing for people to grab for the guitar player in their lives. And the Cher Batten record was released not that long ago, and we'll probably be spending the next year getting that out. And it's the first record I've ever done that it's honestly has any hope of being on the radio.
Great.
Because, all my other ones are a niche guitar audience, pretty much. So I'm excited about that. I'm going to keep doing videos for that. That'll be popping up on YouTube. So if people subscribe to my YouTube channel, there's I got a lot of stuff on there. In fact, you can go see tours that I've done before, because I started a couple years ago making videos of my trips, because I take so many pictures. It kind of occurred to me that when my phone is full of pictures, I dump them off and they end up on a hard drive somewhere I'll never see again. So I started making videos of it. So it's a good way to remember it all. So that's on the YouTube channel on video blogs. Beyond that, the True Fire courses, I'm working on a new one right now.
Ultra Intervallic?
Intervallic?
Yeah. Supersonic Ultra Intervallic. I'm going to keep it a secret in case I don't finish this next project, but I'm excited about it, so
Good.
It'll happen. And batten.com is where you can find anything. There's a merch store, and you can hear samples of music. And I got a guy working on a new website right now, so hopefully in the next month or two it'll be super fresh.
Awesome. So let me tell people those things again. So check out Neck Illusions. That's Neck, N-E-C-K, Illusions, ILLUSIONS.com. And that's where you could buy really cool decorations to put on your guitar neck. And Jennifer's got, you said 6 or 7 patterns there that you've actually designed. Cool. Cher Batten record, where could people listen and buy?
It's in all the usual places, digital downloads, iTunes, Amazon. If you want a physical copy, go to Amazon, since there aren't many physical record stores anymore. That'd be the safest way to go.
And your YouTube channel, is that just youtube.com/Jennifer Batten, or what is it under? Or is it a wacky long initials, or just search Jennifer Batten? What's the best way to find it?
You know what? I suck so much I can't even tell you. If it's not under my name, it's under Mondo Congo.
Okay, there you go.
MONDOCONGO. Because like an idiot, I used that when I started up some of my things like Twitter, and then I go, well, why the hell did I do that? People can't.
Nobody knows. Yeah. So go to YouTube and search for either Jennifer Batten or Mondo Congo, MONDOCONGO, and go to batten.com, because by the time this is published, that your new website should pretty much be close to being done. So, listen, I can't thank you enough. You've been like a real pleasure. I'm not intimidated anymore. I feel like I feel like we could sit down and have coffee together. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Jennifer Batten as much as I did. Thanks again, Jennifer, for spending all the time with us. I really do appreciate it. Go to everyonelovesguitar.com. Sign up to get notified about future episodes along with some cool stuff for guitar players. Now, be nice, go play your guitar, and have some fun, most importantly. Till next time, peace and love, everybody, and I'm out. We hope you enjoyed this show. If you did, subscribe to the Everyone Loves Guitar podcast, and you can do this online at everyonelovesguitar.com or on iTunes. And if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star positive review. The more 5-star reviews we get, the higher our show ranks, and higher rankings mean we get to continue speaking with cool, interesting guests on our show. We'll see you on the next episode, and until then, keep playing your guitar and have fun making music.